I've always been captivated by the forgotten corners of the world, places where time seems to have stopped, where the relics of human ambition lie scattered, half buried under dust blown by relentless winds. Abandoned gas stations with rusted pumps, train depots swallowed by weeds, and mining roads that lead nowhere have a strange allure. There's something about the desert in particular that pulls me in. It's a vast, unyielding expanse where the bones of civilization, crumbling, shacks, rusted machinery, and faded signs lie exposed yet somehow hidden, blending into the ochre landscape. The desert doesn't care about your plans or your fears. It simply exists, indifferent and eternal. That indifference, that raw honesty, makes me feel alive, as if I'm touching something ancient and untamed. In the autumn of 2021, I decided to chase that feeling. I took a few days off work, packed my gear, and drove out to a remote stretch near Kingman, Arizona, a place where the world feels like it's holding its breath. My plan was straightforward: hike through the arid wilderness, snap photos of the stark beauty, and hunt for unmapped mining shafts, a hobby that satisfied my curiosity for forgotten places. I wasn't looking for trouble, maybe a creepy moment or two, the kind that makes your skin prickle and your stories more interesting, but nothing dangerous. The weather was perfect for it, mid-60s during the day, with a crisp chill settling. In at night under a sky so clear it felt like you could reach up and pluck the stars. I was prepared, as always. My SUV was loaded with essentials: a topographic map, 2 GPS units, a satellite phone for emergencies, a first aid kit, plenty of water, snacks, and my trusty GoPro strapped to my chest rig to capture the adventure. I'd heard whispers of an old copper mine west of Kingman, barely noted on any map, accessible only by faint ATV trails and dry riverbeds. It sounded like my kind of place, a secret the desert kept from casual passers-by. I parked my SUV at a spot where the trail widened enough to turn around, shouldered my pack, and set out. The hike was peaceful at first. The desert stretched endlessly around me, a sea of sagebrush and jagged rocks under a relentless sun. After about an hour, I spotted the first shaft. It was partially covered by a weathered wooden grate, the kind that looked like it had been there since the mine was abandoned decades ago. The opening was wide enough to tempt someone reckless like me. I circled it carefully, testing the ground for stability. Finding a solid outcrop with rusted rebar anchors embedded in the rock, I secured my rope and harness, double-checked my knots, and lowered myself down about 15 feet. The descent was short, and the shaft's floor was a mix of compacted dirt and scattered relics. Broken pickaxes, dented metal buckets, and the decayed remains of a wooden sled, all frozen in time. It was exactly what I'd expected until I saw the footprints. They were fresh, unmistakable in the fine layer of dust that coated the shaft's floor. These weren't old tracks blurred by time. The edges were sharp, the impressions clean, as if someone had been here within the last day, maybe even hours. The prints were narrow with a flat tread, maybe from a work shoe, maybe a woman's, I couldn't be sure. They stood out against the scuffed marks my own boots left behind. My heart quickened as I followed the trail with my flashlight. The shaft branched into 2 side tunnels, dark and uninviting, and the footprints led into one of them before vanishing into the shadows. I stood there, the beam of my light trembling slightly in my hand, and for the first time on this trip, I felt something beyond curiosity or caution. It was a primal unease, a gut-level warning that my body understood before my mind could process it. The air felt heavier, the silence thicker, as if the mine itself was watching me. I took a step back, then another. My eyes locked on the tunnel where the footprints disappeared. The quiet was oppressive, broken only by a faint trickle of pebbles from somewhere deeper in the darkness, a sound that didn't belong. It was subtle, like someone or something shifting their weight, aware that I was listening. My skin prickled, and I forced myself to move slowly, deliberately toward the rope. I didn't run, didn't panic, but every muscle in my body screamed to get out. I climbed back to the surface, my hands steady on the rope despite the adrenaline coursing through me. At the rim, I stood catching my breath, staring down into the black maw of the shaft, trying to make sense of what I'd seen and felt. It could have been another explorer, I told myself. Someone who'd come through the night before, maybe. But the desert was empty. No cars, no tracks, no signs of anyone for miles. The thought didn't sit right. Something about those footprints, that sound felt wrong, like the mine was hiding a secret it didn't want me to uncover. I sat on a boulder nearby, my eyes scanning the surrounding landscape, scrubby brush, weathered rocks, and distant ridges that shimmered in the heat. For 20 minutes I watched and listened, waiting for movement, for anything to explain the unease that clung to me like dust. Nothing stirred, but the silence felt alive, watchful. I marked the shaft's location on my map, snapped a few photos from the rim, and decided I'd had enough for the day. I hiked back to a small canyon about a mile away, a picturesque spot with smooth rocks and wind-sculpted ridges that seemed like the perfect place to camp. That night, the desert's silence was absolute, almost suffocating. I tried to shake off the day's unease, telling myself I was just spooked, that the desert plays tricks on a solitary mind. I boiled water on my camp stove, rehydrated a meal of chili mac, and scrolled through my phone, trying to distract myself with a sitcom episode I'd downloaded. But the feeling lingered, a quiet dread that refused to be ignored. Before turning in, I reviewed my GoPro footage, hoping to ground myself in the familiar routine of checking shots. The video was standard at first: dusty boots, the shaft's edge, the relics below. But when I reached the moment where I'd backed away from the footprints, something caught my attention. The audio distorted, not with wind or static, but with a low rhythmic sound, like a slow, controlled breath that wasn't mine. I rewound, turned up the volume, and listened again. It was unmistakable, deep, deliberate breathing, too close to the camera. My stomach churned. As the footage continued, just before the battery died and the video cut off, I heard something else. A single, distinct footstep, heavy and close, as if someone had been standing right behind me. I didn't sleep much that night. Every rustle of wind, every creak of my tent snapped me awake. Around 3 a.m., I heard a faint scraping sound, like sand dragging across canvas. I froze, my hand on my pocket knife, waiting for it to return. It didn't. Morning came slowly, the sky shifting from black to gray to a pale, dusty orange. I packed up at first light, my movements quick but deliberate. As I hiked back to my SUV, I couldn't stop glancing over my shoulder, not obsessively, but enough to know I wasn't just cautious. I was scared, not of a monster or even a person, but of the silence itself, a silence that felt like it was choosing to hide something. Halfway back, I took a wrong turn in a dry wash and stumbled across another shaft, smaller and unmarked. There were no footprints around it, no signs of recent activity, but something made me pause. Carved into the weathered wooden beams at the entrance were 4 vertical scratches, crossed by a diagonal slash, like a tally mark counting days, or people. I didn't linger. I made it back to my SUV, threw my gear in, and drove out of there, the desert's vastness stretching behind me in the rearview mirror. Back home, I transferred the GoPro footage to my computer, hoping distance would dull the unease. It didn't. The breathing was still there, clearer now through my headphones. There was more. A faint metallic clink, like a chain brushing against rock, and a dragging sound as if something heavy was being pulled across the ground. In the final 3 seconds, as I climbed out of the shaft, the camera caught something else. A second set of footsteps, faint but unmistakable, pacing mine. I hadn't found a mine. I'd found something else. Something that wanted me to stay. Next story begins with 2 college kids, me and Kevin, desperate to escape the grind of summer classes. We'd been planning a camping trip for weeks, dreaming of a place where we could unplug and breathe. Kevin found a patch of Bureau of Land Management land in eastern Nevada, a desolate stretch far from civilization. No cell service, no fences, just endless desert under a sky that seemed to go on forever. It sounded like paradise, a place where we could forget deadlines and lectures and just exist. We set out early on a Friday, driving 6 hours from Reno in Kevin's beat-up sedan, our cooler packed with beer and gas station snacks, our trunk stuffed with camping gear. The anticipation built with every mile, the city fading into a blur of sagebrush and open road. We reached the site just before sundown, a flat expanse of hard-packed dirt surrounded by low hills. We set up camp quickly. 2 tents, a fire ring, we built from rocks, and an old folding table Kevin had scavenged from his garage. As the sky turned from gold to deep blue, we cracked open beers, cooked hot dogs over the fire, and laughed about nothing. Buried treasure, UFO crashes, what we'd do with $1 million. Kevin said he'd sell an alien ship for beer money. I said I'd disappear into the wilderness and live like a hermit. It was one of those nights that felt perfect, the kind you don't realize you'll cherish until it's gone. The desert was still, no wind, no bugs, just the kind of silence that lets you hear your own thoughts. We watched the stars emerge, a dazzling canopy that made the world feel both vast and intimate. Around midnight, we called it a night. Kevin's tent was about 15 feet from mine, close enough to hear him if he spoke, but not clearly. We left a flashlight on a stump between us, a small beacon in case one of us needed to get up. I drifted off quickly, lulled by the desert's quiet. But sometime later, maybe an hour, maybe 2, I woke with a start. At first, I thought it was a dream, that hazy space where reality hasn't fully taken hold. But I was awake and I heard something. Soft, deliberate footsteps crunching in the sand like someone trying to move without being noticed. I sat up, heart pounding, and unzipped my tent just an inch. The world outside was dark, save for the faint glow of Kevin's tent and the stars above. I whispered his name, my voice barely audible. No response. Then I heard it, a low, muffled whisper, not from Kevin's tent but right outside it, like someone crouching and speaking softly, coaxing, like they were trying to calm a frightened animal. The words were indistinct, but the tone sent a chill through me. I froze, staring at the silhouette of Kevin's tent, waiting for the sound to return. It didn't. The silence was total, heavy, like the desert was holding its breath. I waited a full minute before lying back down, my eyes wide open, every nerve on edge. I must have drifted off eventually because the next thing I remember is Kevin's scream tearing through the night. I bolted upright, unzipped my tent, and saw an orange glow. His tent was engulfed in flames, the fire snapping and roaring. His silhouette thrashed inside, trapped. I ran barefoot, yelling his name, and grabbed a corner of the tent, tearing the burning nylon with my hands. Kevin was tangled in his sleeping bag, his leg caught, his face contorted in pain and panic. I pulled him free, dragging him away from the flames. His shirt was half melted, his arms red and blistered. I doused him with water from our cooler, the liquid hissing as it hit his skin. He coughed, screamed, tried to speak, his hands shaking, so badly I had to guide a water bottle to his lips. We sat in the dirt, trembling, as the tent burned to nothing but twisted poles and ash. I kept asking what happened, but Kevin could only repeat one thing. Someone was in the tent. At first, I thought he was delirious, the shock and pain clouding his mind. But his eyes, wild, searching, filled with a fear I'd never seen, told a different story. He said he'd woken to someone standing over him, a shadow he thought was me until he saw the face. "It wasn't you," he kept saying, his voice breaking. "It wasn't you." I swept my flashlight around the campsite, the beam cutting through the darkness, but it revealed nothing. No tracks, no gear, no sign of anyone. Yet I didn't feel alone. The hairs on my neck stood up, and every time I turned the light toward the bushes, I braced for something to step into view. We sat back to back until sunrise, Kevin whimpering, me clutching the camp hatchet, its weight, a small comfort against the unknown. When daylight finally broke, we packed what we could salvage. Kevin's arms were raw, his skin blistered. I drove him to a hospital an hour and a half away, the silence in the car heavier than the desert's. At the hospital, we gave a statement to the sheriff. They photographed the burn site, promised to send someone out, but their tone was skeptical. Too remote, no cameras, no tracks. When I mentioned the whispering, the deputy shrugged. "Could have been the wind," he said. I almost laughed. Wind doesn't whisper your name. Kevin was never the same. He dropped out of school that fall, moved to Montana to live with his uncle. We texted for a while, but he refused to talk about that night. The one time I brought it up, he hung up. A year later, he blocked my number. I don't blame him. He saw something I didn't, something he can't forget. We thought we were alone in that desert. I think we were wrong. As a field biologist, my work takes me to places most people avoid. Remote stretches of wilderness where the only sounds are the wind and the occasional cry of a coyote. In spring 2021, I was assigned to a site near Marfa, West Texas, a desolate landscape of dry brush, cracked earth, and oil access roads that snaked through the emptiness. My job was to set up camera traps and acoustic sensors to monitor small mammals, a task that required long days under a scorching sun and nights that turned unexpectedly cold. I'd been out there for 3 days, my skin sunburned, my mind accustomed to the solitude. The desert has a way of stripping away distractions, leaving you with nothing but your thoughts and the vastness around you. On the third night, I made camp in a quiet, flat spot near a dry wash, nestled between two low ridges. There was no cell service, no hum of distant rigs, just the stillness of a world untouched by human noise. I pitched my tent as the sun dipped below the horizon, cooked instant ramen on my propane stove, and sat on a rock, jotting notes as the sky turned from gold to black. The stars were breathtaking, a glittering tapestry that made me feel both insignificant and connected to something ancient. I lingered, stargazing, letting the desert's quiet wash over me. That's when I saw it, a faint light, barely a flicker, moving slowly across the scrubland about 400 yards away. It bobbed like someone carrying a flashlight, a steady, rhythmic motion. I assumed it was another surveyor, maybe a landowner checking wells. It wasn't common this far out, but it wasn't impossible. I stood, waved my headlamp to signal my presence, and called out, "You good out there?" No response. The light didn't waver, didn't acknowledge me, just continued its lazy arc before dimming and vanishing. 10 minutes later, it reappeared. Closer now, maybe 200 yards away, still bobbing with that same deliberate rhythm. I called out again, my voice swallowed by the desert. Nothing. No engine, no voices, just the light. I tried to rationalize it. A pipeline worker, a heat mirage, a distant rig's reflection, but the explanations felt hollow. The light vanished, again, and I zipped up my tent trying to laugh off the unease. Sleep didn't come easily. Then the light returned, closer this time, maybe 50 yards away. It wasn't bobbing anymore. It was still, a steady beam pointed directly at my tent, flooding the interior with a cold, white glow. I lay frozen, my breath caught in my throat, my hand clutching my multi-tool. The light didn't flicker, didn't move, just held steady, pinning me in place. I counted the seconds, reaching 300 before losing track, my body aching from the tension. At one point I heard faint footsteps, 2 soft crunches in the dirt, then nothing. I wanted to yell, to break the silence, but something told me to stay quiet. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the light vanished, like a switch had been flipped. Didn't sleep. When dawn broke, I unzipped the tent and stepped into the pale morning light. The desert looked normal. No footprints, no tire marks, no broken branches. I walked a wide circle around the campsite, searching for answers. About 30 feet away, in the direction the light had come from, I found a patch of disturbed gravel, as if something had knelt there. The shape was vague but intentional, like a mark left behind. I didn't stay long. I packed up and drove to the ranger station, recounting everything to the officer on duty. He listened, nodded, and said, "We hear stories like that sometimes. Could be pranksters, could be worse." When I asked what he meant, he just shrugged. "People disappear out here. Some come to do things they don't want seen." A week later, an envelope arrived at my home with no return address. Inside was a smooth gray rock identical to the gravel at that campsite. I hadn't told anyone about the trip, hadn't posted online, but someone knew where I'd been. My license plate had been visible the whole time. Maybe someone had noted it, traced it. The thought made my skin crawl. That light wasn't lost. It wasn't looking for help. It knew exactly where I was. My final story began as a quest for solitude. I'd taken 2 weeks off to explore the Arizona Strip, a remote stretch between the Grand Canyon and the Utah border. It's a place of red cliffs, dusty roads, and endless scrubland, far from cell towers or towns. I wanted silence, not adventure, just a few days of camping before heading to Zion. The first night was everything I'd hoped for. I found a clearing sheltered by rock formations, set up my tent, and cooked soup on my camp stove. The stars were brilliant, the quiet absolute. I sipped a beer, letting the desert stillness settle into my bones. The next morning, I noticed a blue, weathered truck parked a few hundred feet away. It looked out of place, its paint chipped, its frame sagging from years of hard use. I was annoyed. There was endless space out here, and I'd chosen this spot for its isolation. Still, it was public land. A man stepped out, probably in his 60s, wiry, with a white beard that made him look like he belonged in a frontier story. He gave a polite nod, which I returned, but he didn't approach, just started unloading gear. Plastic bins, a tarp, no tent or cooler. Midday, I noticed he was digging a large square pit, about 6 feet long, 3 feet wide, and deep. He worked methodically, his shovel moving with purpose, not rushed, but deliberate, like he was crafting something important. Curiosity got the better of me. I walked over, trying to keep it light. "Burying treasure out here?" I asked with a grin. He looked up, his eyes sharp, and gave a thin smile. "Just in case I meet someone worth burying," he said, then laughed. A quiet, hollow sound that made my stomach twist. I forced a chuckle, waved, and walked back to my camp, my instincts screaming to leave. I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe he was just eccentric, his humor dark but harmless. But the day felt off after that. I couldn't focus, couldn't shake the image of him digging. By evening, he'd framed the pit with wooden planks, and I heard metal clanging like he was hammering stakes into the ground. That night, I lay in my tent, the wind howling outside. I heard other sounds, twigs snapping, faint footsteps just beyond my fire's glow. Once I thought I saw his silhouette on the ridge watching, but when I turned my headlamp, nothing was there. Before bed, I noticed he'd covered the pit with a blue tarp, secured with rocks. The shape underneath wasn't flat, it bulged like something was inside. I told myself it was dirt, a way to keep the pit clear of sand. But it didn't feel. Right around 2 a.m., I woke to footsteps circling my tent, slow, deliberate, not an animal's erratic scuffle. They paused, then circled again. I held my breath, my hand inches from my multi-tool, too afraid to move. I heard a single scrape like a shovel in dirt, then silence. No retreating steps, just nothing. At dawn, I emerged to find his camp gone. Truck, tarp, pit, all vanished. The ground where the pit had been was smoothed over, but drag marks led into the brush. I followed them for a few feet before my nerve gave out. I packed up, drove to the highway, and reported it to the police, giving them the coordinates. The officer listened, asked for photos I didn't have, and said they'd check it out. I never heard back. That man wasn't just digging a pit. He was preparing, waiting to decide who it was for. The desert is vast, but it's not empty. It holds secrets, and some of them are watching you.